And I think it's interesting because nowadays when I talk to someone and I tell them, "Hey, how's your day going? How's your life going?" They just say, "Well, it's been good. It's been busy and just been working." And that's most of the time the story or the type of conversations that I have with people.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
and instead of a story being told, we're just kind of telling a recap of the general things that are going on. Welcome back to the Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, Jose, your host, get to talk about outside of the box ideas. Today, we're going to be talking about how how to create a story, how to create a good story that connects with people, that hooks people um, into hearing what you have to say. Sometimes when we hear about stories, we think of bedtime stories, right? But why are stories so impactful, and why are stories what have moved society in general? Um, I recently been researching stories, and I've been looking at specifically this guy named Matthew Dix. He is actually a teacher, but writes a lot about storytelling and specifically analyzes movies as well into why certain movies have impacted the mainstream culture. And at the end of the day, a story has the power to make somebody feel something that they did not feel before. And I think that is very powerful how not only are scenes and movies impactful, but just the simple telling a story verbally can make a big impact. Right now, a lot of society has turned to podcasting and to audiobooks. So a lot of people are actually now doing a little bit of mix in terms of consuming content. And so I think there's a big potential as well in telling stories verbally. And so we want to go deeper into this and see what stories actually can do in our lives, and also how stories are structured and how to create a good story,
mm,
right? So just to start off, I know Steele, you and I were talking about the recent Guardians of the Galaxy movie and how you said Marvel might have done like a really good job in this storyline.
yeah.
What do you think are some aspects within that story that you would say made it made it into the top Marvel movies?
Yeah. So I'm not gonna give any spoilers, but if you don't want to know anything about it, if you want to go in blind, then turn off the video now. But what I liked about Guardians of the Galaxy 3, what made it stand out from the other two and from actually Marvel movies in general, actually, was the emotional weight that it had. Um, I told you, Jose, that before we started this podcast, that I actually thought it was the best Marvel movie that I've seen since Spider-Man 2. You know, with Tobey Maguire, like the original Spider-Man 2. And I mean, that wasn't even Marvel Studios at the time. But yeah, and the reason why I say that is because just s- the the writing was so well done with making you care about the characters. Characters, mind you, that I would never think that I would ever care about. Rocket Raccoon, for example. Like, I wouldn't think that I would care about that character, but James Gunn he wrote and directed this movie. He's so good at like writing and making you care about the characters, like the Suicide Squad movie he made too. He's so good at making you care about these characters that you wouldn't think you would. Silly, like cartoon characters almost, you know? But he takes it seriously, and he just the emotional places that he goes and is willing to go, the dark places he's willing to go, to me,
Mm.
that makes it stand out, and I like movies like that because I feel more invested in the characters and the story. I'm scared for the characters, and I care about them.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you said that the movie impacted you emotionally
Yeah, definitely.
because
And multiple
Matthew Dix, right, multiple times. Matthew Dix he has a long career of doing public speaking and sharing to others how to craft good stories. And apparently, most of the stories that created a big impact in his audience were actually not stories of the superhero or stories of him doing something great, but rather the opposite of him actually losing something or falling short of an actual truth that he later comes to realize is important. And I think that's the aspect of vulnerability, right? When a character on the screen or a character on stage, whoever's telling you the story becomes vulnerable to the audience can feel for them, especially if they craft the story in a way that the audience can understand it. Because most of these fiction movies, we cannot really understand them because they're in space, they have laser guns, they have all this other stuff that we don't see in our day-to-day life, but they connect because they touch on certain topics that are so fundamental to human existence that it latches into our essence, right? It kind of pulls a string of what we felt in the past and makes us feel for the character as a human. And so I think that's something that's very powerful of stories when somebody's able to just be vulnerable. And it's almost like the Wolverine movie that we've talked about before, right? Whenever Wolverine is is dying or losing his
Sure.
strength, then we can feel for the character
It's more interesting.
because
Yeah.
it's more interesting, because now it's not just a superhero that can do it all or it can win every time, but now we can feel for potentially him dying.
Yeah, and you know that I just read an article today that Zack Snyder, the director of Man of Steel, the remake of Superman, the original Superman was more of a Boy Scout, more of a, and I like that version too. I watched those movies and I think they're great for what they were at the time. And I think I read a thing, but Zack Snyder was trying to do, he said he wanted to, he said the hardest part about making the Superman movie of Man of Steel was making Superman a relatable character because he's like a god. He's like invincible. So he was like, that was the biggest challenge was how can I make him face problems if he's invincible? And so he kind of said he had to find ways to make it something like whether it's a romantic problem or a moral problem or problems with the people on Earth itself. And you know, looking at Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, while they're not like perfect movies, you know, there's still I thought there was interesting aspects and potential with the Superman character that Zack Snyder was trying to do. Yeah, he made him darker and stuff, but he was all I feel like he was trying to make him more relatable, and that's why for me, I kind of connected more to that version because it felt more relatable, you know. So, but I like what you said because I don't know about you, but to me, that's what's missing in a lot of modern movies. Like, I don't know if you ever saw that Ghostbusters remake with female casts, like,
No, I haven't seen it.
or not just that one, but like other ones, just some of the Marvel movies, even recently, or
Hmm.
even some animated movies recently, or even some, not all, but some Star Wars things recently too. To me, the big problem I have with a lot of modern blockbuster and mainstream movies is that they don't challenge the characters enough. The characters just go through the plot like there's like it's no big deal. Like everything's so easy to do. It's like each part of the plot just happens and there's hardly any struggle or challenge along the way. And then that's it. That's the movie. And it's like to me, that's not it's kind of boring because to me my favorite when I think about my favorite movies, what they all have in common is that they involve the characters going through extremely difficult challenges and struggles throughout the whole movie, sometimes to where you're thinking in your mind, how how is the character going to get out of this situation? How are they going to achieve their goal? It seems impossible.
Mm,
Those are the
yeah.
so
And I would be interested in seeing how if somebody could make a movie where they actually don't solve the problem.
yeah, and there's been some, they're just really rare.
Like for example, like the Avengers movie where Thanos wins, the villain wins. That was a movie that impacted everyone.
Yeah.
right? Because we're so used to the villain losing, the heroes winning and fighting everyone, and everybody dies except them. And whenever Thanos actually won, I think it was such a contrary to what we're so used to, right?
So
It's
unexpected.
almost like we were talking about like pop music. You just know that it's going to be similar to something that's been done before. It's replicated time and time again. And in a sense, it's what Seth Godin talks about, that it's a hack. You become a hack, right? It's something that you expect. People are going to enjoy it. It wows people, but not in the sense of something extraordinary or something of a masterpiece, but something that it's going to work. And so you create a formula that people can feel familiar with and is not going to expand their level of understanding of the world, but it's just going to help them pass time and enjoy a good time. So those are those are um, those are hacks. But if you want to create a actual masterpiece, that takes time, that takes effort. You can't just pull it out of a magic hat and have it happen.
Yeah, I feel like
But
yeah, exactly. And I feel like the most boring movies are just kind of like that, where there's not really any high stakes and nothing. The hero or main character doesn't face very many challenges, and they just kind of go through the plot. It's almost like you can tell someone wrote it because it's just things are just happening to move the plot along rather than the character struggling to accomplish the goal. Yeah, it's like a straight line of just no complications. Like here's the beginning and the goals over here, and just the whole movie is just them going to the goal. It's kind of boring because it doesn't really feel like much happens. But a really interesting movie is like the goal's here, but the character goes all over the place to get there, and they're struggling. They have to really struggle to get there, and it makes the payoff even more. It makes it feel like a payoff achieving that goal compared to not struggling at all. Because yeah, I mean that's what a payoff is. You have to struggle to get. You have to earn it. You have to put effort to get there. And if you have a character that puts in zero effort throughout the whole movie to get there, it's like watching someone just walk across the street. It's nothing really. It's just
yeah,
one. That's it.
one of the things that I wanted to challenge this conversation with was a lot of people, they say, well, I don't have anything interesting to say. I don't have an interesting story to tell. And in a sense, that mentality can already show that they've already lost in a sense, right? They haven't tried. But if we were to take simple moments in life, whether that be drinking a cup of coffee or whether that be walking to the park, how can we use those ordinary moments and make them extraordinary while telling a story, right? How can we tell a story that is so simple yet so effective that moves somebody? Does that come with inquisitiveness? Like, do you have to be actually looking deeper into the world, or can you really tell a story out of something simple?
I guess you probably can. Yeah. I think there's probably been some like that. Yeah.
Right? Because a story has to have some sort of intrigue or some sort of process change. Could it be, that the coffee in itself today tasted different, and then start the story right there, right? Today, the coffee tasted different because 2 weeks ago, I used to drink coffee with my grandmother, and coffee was something where I bonded with my grandmother. But last night, I heard that she passed away. And so today, coffee tastes different. than it was before, because now I can I don't have anybody to share this coffee with. And before, the taste of coffee reminded me of the great conversations that we had. And all I can think about today is losing my grandmother. And in that moment, something that was very simple, right? Which is having a cup of coffee, it can be used as something completely different.
Or comp
And yeah, yeah, I think sometimes we oversee, or we just breeze by actual important concepts. It's almost like the idea of how time, like we've talked about the idea of time, and time seems to go by very fast nowadays. But could it be, and the author Matthew Dix actually talks about this too, but could it be that we're just trashing our memories? Like we're going through our day and we can't remember what we ate 2 weeks ago, or what happened the first time that we went to college. Who did we talk to the first day that I walked onto campus? Do we remember those stories? Do we actually write them down? Right. And those are things that Matthew Dix actually has taken this homework for life, what he calls homework for life, where he writes one story a day based on what happened in his life that day. And so, uh, and roughly about 17 years ago is when he had his kids. So he actually remembers and has written down stories about his kids the first time that they went sailing in a boat, and he has that story written down, and different other stories. And so while some people might say, well, where have the years gone by with my kids, they grew up so fast, he actually knows where each day went, right, where each
You wrote it down.
moment went in the 365 days that we have in the year. So I think that's interesting, man. I
Yeah,
think
there's
that,
things we've forgotten, you know?
yeah, yeah, because sometimes we think that in order to tell a story, it has to be a hero story. It
Yeah,
has
that's
to be
that's
something
I used to think that.
extraordinary.
Oh, yeah, I can speak from personal experience. I used to think that way as someone who's written scripts since, well, since, like, middle school, and a lot of my early stuff were from middle school to high school was all action, 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 hero, hero, fight, violence, stuff like nothing else. And then in St. Mary's University, I was challenged by one of my peers to write a love story. And I was like, that's the
Mm,
last thing I want to do. Like, well, that sounds boring. And I don't watch romantic movies, so I don't have interest to begin with, like, and why would me of all people to make one? It's so weird. But then I was like, then I thought about it from a different perspective. And I was like, instead of thinking about it as like, oh, this is just a lame thing to make, I was like, no, let me think about it like a challenge. Let me challenge myself to make a love story that no one's ever seen before. Let me make my own version. And so that I think kind of like it's the reason why I was opposed to it is because I was like, it's not going to be interesting. It's to be boring because there's no action, there's no hero, there's no violence. But the way I made it interesting was the truth and honesty of what how hard it is to get a girlfriend, and then the awkward parts of it that people don't show in the love comedies, and then the realistic aspects of it, and trying to make it the most realistic kind of, I guess, romantic comedy you could not, even though it's not really what I made it to be. But and then also cinematography, I was gonna try to make it the best cinematography I'd ever done. I was gonna try to use the most out of the box camera angles I could think of, pushing the boundaries. And so I was trying to take something ordinary in life, like a love story, and trying to make it as interesting as I could with making it different from what other people have done before. So yeah, kind of like you were saying, like taking inspiration from real life and telling ordinary stories. Can you do it? I think you can because I did it with that movie, and that taught me a valuable lesson of that I can tell stories like that. I don't have to have a gunfire and explosions to do it, or even fake blood. I can do a movie without it. So
Yeah, and so these simple stories can, in a sense, be great stories, right? We can definitely take and learn from the simplicity of life, and I think it's almost biblical as well, right? Jesus said he takes the greater truths and gives them to the most simple people, the simple of heart, the poor in spirit, right? And why is that? Because that's where the extraordinary can happen, right? They see the simple things as extraordinary. And with a world that moves so fast, sometimes we can oversee the extraordinary and the simplicity, and we expect extraordinary in the most complex things of life nowadays. And so perhaps it could be that we're losing our ability to tell stories.
Yeah. What do you think's making us lose that ability? Like, you know?
And it could be partly because we're becoming more of a consumer society than an actual creative society. I mean, we we're just repeating what other people have said, repeating what other people have done.
They don't
And
have ideas.
yeah, and Matthew Dix also says this, that sometimes we learn to be bad storytellers because when we get back home and our family asks us, "How was your day?" We're just used to doing bullet points and saying, like, "Well, I did this, and then I did that, and then I did this." And then the same thing happens when we go to vacation. Well, I went to the Mayan Palace, and then I ate ice cream at this stand that was nearby. And we don't tell stories, right? We just bullet point what happened as if it was, in a sense, just a recap of what we did. And I think it's interesting because nowadays when I talk to someone and I tell them, "Hey, how's your day going? How's your life going?" They just say, "Well, it's been good. It's been busy and just been working." And that's most of the time the story or the type of conversations that I have with people.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's like,
and instead of a story being told, we're just kind of telling a recap of the general things that are going on,
can I get
which goes to show that we're not really paying attention to our day-to-day lives, right? If we can just say our life is busy and it's full of work,
yeah, that's true.
our days are going by unnoticed at that point.
Yeah, because
And or perhaps we're just too scared of being vulnerable because great stories require vulnerability. And if we're
I
not capable of doing that, then we're just too afraid of being exposed or too afraid of standing out.
yeah, because the fear of vulnerability leads to being superficial and just talking surface level small talk. And I see that in a lot of modern movies where it's mostly comedy, surface level comedy. Because surface level comedy, I'm not saying comedy is easy to write, it's not. That's why I don't do it because it's hard to make a joke that's funny. I don't want to risk, a joke falling flat. That's why I don't tend to do comedy. I don't trust myself. Maybe it's something I can explore later on, but the point is like I feel like a lot of movies do that now because they think it's more mainstream and what people and it's easier kind of because it's easier to kind of in some sense do that than to try to tell a vulnerable, deeper emotional story, like I don't know. Like I've often wondered that. Is that why they're like because I was like, why do movies now why are they so afraid to have those dramatic emotional moments? Is it because they're afraid it's going to come off as cheesy, or are they afraid the audience isn't going to buy into it? And I could see that because you have to sell it. It's hard to sell an emotional moment. If you don't sell it, people will think it's cheesy and they won't like your movie. So it's easier to make fun of it and make it a comedy because people are going to laugh at it on purpose instead of on accident.
Mm.
So that's why Guardians of the Galaxy 3 stood out because it wasn't trying to be as funny. It was trying to actually let those emotional moments play out. It was brave enough
Mm.
That's why I like it.
You know what? One of the interesting things that I heard from Matthew Dix in an interview that he was doing was that he was talking about the first Jurassic Park movie. And he says that the actual movie in itself, the story is not about dinosaurs.
Well,
The story is actually about a man and a woman who have different ideas of what it means to have kids, right?
oh yeah,
So this man doesn't want to have kids, and the wife or the girlfriend does want to have kids. And he says that they're so annoying. Why would somebody want kids? And throughout the movie, you see how with these two kids that he's stuck with throughout the journey, he becomes open to the idea of caring for them.
yeah, that's
And throughout the movie, he becomes the man capable of accepting having kids to the point where now he can accept his girlfriend fully because now they're both in the same page. And so Matthew Dix was saying, well, if they were to advertise it that way, people wouldn't want to go see a movie like you wouldn't tell your friend, hey, let's go watch a movie about two people that have different thoughts about having kids. And at the end of the movie, they end up wanting kids. You think about it and you're like, well, I don't want to watch that movie.
yeah,
But that's what the movie is all about, right? But they put into the mix the dinosaurs, and that's where people say, well, yeah, that's a type of movie that I want to go see.
that's
But perhaps we can do a mixture, and it's not tricking people, but it's almost like reeling them in through entertainment, but then education as well. So you do a mixture of both,
yeah,
but the entertainment is what you use to attract, and then the educational part is also
yeah.
like the it's weaved in.
It's like, yeah, it's like entertainment on one level, and then on another level, it's vulnerable, personal, human story or emotional story, a character arc, and that's what's like the modern Jurassic Park movies. I haven't seen too many of them, so I can't speak for all of them. But I think what was missing is that human character arc, because the first one was about that the children and that the guy warming up to being open to having children, you know? It was a deeper, vulnerable, emotional part and dinosaurs. But the other ones were I feel like were just dinosaurs and that was it. There's nothing else. And to me, they're not as memorable. I the first one to me is the best one from what I remember. And maybe that's because of that emotional arc.
Mm,
Interstellar did the same thing. Interstellar was not just about space travel. It was also about a father and daughter's love for each other. Uh, and there's other movies too, like, I'm trying to think.
yeah,
I'm sure there's other examples, but yeah.
there's always something deeper that is what is used to connect with the audience, but people themselves are not willing to go there, right? It's almost like you have to reel them in through another another type of aspect, right? Like another entertainment aspect.
Yeah, and I've always tried to kinda keep that in mind, when writing my movies, like, my friends wanted me to make a Fallout movie. I was like, I've already made them, but we found some cool locations, and I was like, I was open to it, but in the back of my mind, I was like, I only wanna do this if I can make the story good enough. And in my mind, whether it was unconscious or conscious, in my mind when I was writing the script for it, like when I was thinking, I want to make this story good enough, was I was thinking I want to have some type of emotional pull. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but it has to be some type of emotional thing going on in this movie, or else I don't really want to commit to it fully, you know? And so, really, what that ended up being about was like loss and like just kind of struggles and stuff of survival, but just different things like that. But like that to me, that's what I think of when I'm like, I want to make a story good. I want the characters to be struggling with something emotional. I don't know what, but it's got to be something there, or else to me, it's not interesting. Although it's a flat.
Yeah.
But to me, that's what's cool about Christopher Nolan, man, is he's the only director I know now that can do blockbusters and make an intelligent movie that's like above our brain. Like most blockbusters are just dumb action, dumb blockbusters. Christopher Nolan's blockbusters are smart, intelligent, like philosophical, science-based stuff, but it's also a blockbuster. It's so cool. I love it. But yeah,
It's really people are not willing to go the extra mile sometimes
yeah,
to create something interesting, right?
yeah,
Like whenever we were talking about this before the podcast, there's this other book called Stealing Like an Artist. And in this book, the the author reveals how sometimes people have to go back in time, back to people who inspired the people that they feel inspired from, and maybe even another step back. And so you start seeing this family tree of inspiration. And when you go back enough and start learning from those artists, then you have something interesting to pull into the modern age to that seems new, but in reality is just a mixture of all these different people that you've been looking at and researching to
right.
make something interesting and something that has been well thought out, has been worked on. And even in on YouTube, sometimes you see these videos that everybody can just replicate and they work, yeah, but people dancing, people just doing these videos that are easy to make. But then when you see a video that becomes a masterpiece, right? So something that took not just one day or one week, but took 6 months to make,
Yeah,
then that's when you say, wow, this is a masterpiece.
yeah,
This is something that took time and was well crafted.
yeah. And I think, yeah, definitely the time. And unfortunately, sometimes even putting in that time, some people still don't get the recognition, I guess. Really, I guess sometimes it depends on what it is, whether it grabs people's attention or something that people are interested in. And yeah, like you're saying earlier, I think almost every artist borrows from other artists that inspired them, like a lot of movie directors or painters will be able to name painters and directors that inspired their work. Um, so like for me, it's like David Lynch and Salvador Dali that inspires my oil paintings. And I'm sure there's other artists like Francis Bacon and body horror and then mixing it together to create something new. Like, yes, you are borrowing from those people that you admire, but you're mixing them together to create something that is different, you know? So,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, definitely.
it's awesome, man. So yeah, I guess we can close it there on that thought. But I think we've learned different things throughout this podcast, just how stories sometimes take risks. And it takes risks in the sense that it takes an aspect of vulnerability to really go places where people are not willing to go themselves. But
Definitely.
it's because of that people feel connected to the story, right? Because it pulls people to places that they themselves wouldn't have gone. But
Draws them.
because the story went there, then yeah, are you all right, Steele?
No, I don't know. It's like, I don't know if it's my contact or what's going on there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but because the storyteller is willing to go into places that other people are not, people feel connected there. They feel like they can relate.
Yeah, that human,
And that is a beautiful thing.
definitely, man, definitely.
Nice. Well, thank you guys for watching. If you really enjoy this content, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and also make sure to watch other videos just like this one. We have an array of different stories, really podcast episodes that we record every week. And honestly, these range from different topics. So make sure to look at our podcast and hope you enjoy other content here. Until next time, we will see you soon. Take care.